The storm rolled in faster than forecast. Systems blurred. Data feeds dropped. One by one, the pilots reported signal loss. A corridor run turned into a dead channel, and no one could see a way out. The fifth-gen jets circled, unsure, their commands tangled in delays. Leona sat at the edge of the board, unassigned. No one called her name. No one gave her clearance. But she saw the wind curl on the screen, saw the ridgeline split. While the others waited for the system to stabilize, she stood. And by the time they looked up, she was already flying. The coastal base sat flat against the horizon, its airstrip framed by dry grass, wind-worn fences, and the low hum of distant ocean surf. The morning light was hard and colorless, bouncing off the canopies of F-35s lined neatly on the primary apron. Crews moved quickly between them in mirrored sunglasses and flight vests, their steps confident, their chatter clipped and casual. The tarmac shimmered with heat even this early, and the smell of fuel carried easily on the wind. Far off to the left of the flight line, beyond the shadow of the press access hangar and outside the painted bounds of the ready pad, sat a single A-18C. Its paint was faded along the spine, tail markings dulled and peeling. The aircraft's skin bore the matte scars of old weather, old landings, old missions. It was functional, but it didn't gleam. No one took pictures of it. No one pointed. Leona approached it without ceremony. Her long blonde hair was tied back, tucked clean beneath a worn cap. Her olive-toned face remained unreadable as she walked the perimeter of the old bird, boots silent on the cracked concrete. She wore a green flight jacket, clean but faded, with no call sign stitched above the chest, no name tag, no squadron patch. She carried nothing but her logbook tucked under one arm, and a small wrench handle slid into the pocket beside it. A junior technician from the adjacent maintenance bay passed by and looked over. He didn't stop, but he muttered low enough to be heard. "Trim tab Barbie's out early?" No one corrected him. No one looked up from the tool racks. Leona didn't respond. She paused by the nose of the aircraft, rested one hand along the edge of the intake, and scanned the horizon beyond the base. A cargo truck rolled past the edge of the airfield toward the fuel sheds, on the far side of the lot. The F-35 crews were prepping for a training sortie real-time control link scenario. Two-wave launch. The ground crew near them worked fast, polished, rehearsed. Someone checked the reflective finish on a canopy with the edge of a sleeve. In the open flight tent, Ethan stood near the corner whiteboard. He was clean-shaven, tall, with a square jaw and perfect posture. His flight suit fit like it had been tailored. The crew gathered around him as he laughed and traced an approach pattern across the board. Someone nudged him and pointed toward the outer apron. "She's bringing that antique again." Ethan leaned back to squint past the line of hangars, his helmet tucked under one arm. "That's the backup bird," he said. "Looks like something out of a documentary. No wonder they're parking it in the weeds." The others chuckled. One of the officers added, "I think it still runs on coal." Ethan tapped the helmet with his thumb and shook his head. "Well, if she loses a stabilizer, she can always crank the trim by hand. That's what they did in the old days, right?" No one replied. The laughter trailed off. Leona crouched beside the main landing gear and ran her fingers over the panel seal. She pressed lightly near the leading edge to check the tension. Satisfied, she moved to the rear and climbed onto the wing via the ladder that groaned quietly under her boots. Once, on top, she opened the small access panel beneath the control linkage and adjusted the trim tab cable with a practiced, nearly invisible movement. The tool never left her hand. The motion was memorized. Back inside the flight tent, the day's rotation schedule was posted on the transparent board facing the command wall. 12 names, 2 shifts, no sign of Leona, under redundancy support. A single line read, FA-18C, unassigned crew pilot, no initials, no call sign. Ethan's name appeared 3 times. Primary pilot, telemetry lead, mission recorder liaison. No one looked at the bottom of the board. By midday, the sun had pressed hard across the base, leaving long glare lines on the aircraft canopies and washing out the shadows beneath the overhangs. Leona remained with the FA-18 working silently. She refolded a ground map and slipped it into the inner pocket of her jacket. The map had no digital overlay. It was annotated by hand in pencil, with elevation notations and wind shear predictions along a canyon route no one else had discussed. The cafeteria was full during briefing. Leona was not there. She ate near the edge of the fueling lot, seated on a steel case, with her logbook across her lap. She wrote clean, even lines, no commentary, just time codes and throttle response notes from the last engine check. A pair of junior pilots passed within a few yards of her, heading to the admin bay. One glanced over, saw her writing, and shook his head. She's still logging simulator outputs by hand. Maybe she's doing a novel, the other replied. They didn't slow. Leona finished her note and closed the logbook with a soft pat against the worn leather. She stood, dusted off her jacket, and walked the long path back to the old jet, boots whispering over the pavement. By the time evening settled over the base, the other aircraft had been towed into hangars or locked beneath awnings. The lights were dim, the noise low. The sky had begun to turn violet at the edges, and the wind from the sea brought in a sharp, clean chill. Only one aircraft remained out under open sky. The FA-18C sat near the end of the pad, quiet and forgotten, its skin catching the last low light along the tail fin. Leona sat beneath the wing on the concrete, back against the gear strut. Her helmet was beside her. Her gloves hung from her belt. In her hands rested the same logbook, now open to a page marked Trim Hold at Wind Offset, 100.0. She read it without blinking. A single line had been added in her own hand. Fly the airframe, not the system. She didn't smile. She didn't shift. She simply turned the page. The simulator bay was always colder after hours. The climate control clicked softly behind the wall panels, cycling air through a room that was already empty of people. Only the low hum of standby monitors and the faint scuff of Leona's boots across the polished floor broke the silence. She keyed herself into the corner unit, the one marked with a faded maintenance tag, and waited for the old pod to cycle up. Its side panels were dull from use, edges worn smooth where gloves had brushed past them for years. The harness click was louder than the newer rigs. The trim toggles inside had patches of peeled tape, the grip worn down to metal on the right side. The system chirped twice, then dropped into standby. Leona didn't need the audio prompts. She reached forward and flipped each switch in sequence, adjusting the trim dials by feel before the visual cue caught up. She flew the sequence again. Same wind curve, same lateral roll under turbulent crossfeed, same stick feel as the real FA-18C parked in the far lot. In the simulator, the terrain lines blinked slowly across the screen. No AI stabilization, no autopilot envelope, just manual trim, altitude drift, and reaction time. Outside the pod, the bay remained quiet. A floor tech passed once, checking a readout on the panel by the door. He paused when he saw the unit active, squinted at the tag, then kept walking. Leona flew the canyon corridor twice, then 3 more times, each with increasing wind shear programmed manually into the override field. The left stabilizer glitched once on the 3rd run. She adjusted trim manually and held the line. She shut down the sim just before midnight and walked back across the compound under an orange halogen glow. The wind had shifted inland. The hangars moaned faintly under pressure. She passed a group of younger pilots leaving the ready room, their arms full of protein bars and rehydration packets. One of them glanced at her and smiled without humor. "Still doing legacy trim drills," he said. "We've got overlay for that now." Leona nodded once, then turned down the adjacent walkway. The exchange ended there. In her quarters, a map lay spread across the metal desk. It had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases had softened into valleys. Pencil lines curved down the page in exact elevation spacing. Some overlapped with wind drift arcs. Others marked only by coded notations. No labels, no grid, A strip of masking tape ran across the top, handwritten in marker. It read, South Canyon Entry, wind at 100.0. She sat for an hour with a ruler and a soft pencil, refining a vertical climb option in the side path marked unnecessary by base doctrine. She drew it anyway. The main route was clean, but the weather model didn't account for sudden curl during downslope wind push. She had seen that happen once before. That flight hadn't made it back. The next morning, she walked the A-18's perimeter again. Her steps were slow, deliberate, unhurried. She pressed her fingertips into each fastener without speaking, checking for looseness not visible by eye. She tapped the access plate near the right wing's hydraulic coupling, then moved on. No checklist, no tablet, just order remembered by hand. Inside the cockpit, she removed the protective flap from the trim wheel and adjusted it 2 degrees right. Her gloves remained tucked into her belt. The manual wheel was cold from the night air. It responded smoothly, with a faint click between teeth. She logged the position by memory, not screen. A crew supervisor near the far pad glanced her way and shook his head, speaking to no one in particular. She really just flies muscle memory. No stabilization. One of the techs shrugged. She doesn't even use the HUD, must be flying by smell. They laughed, but no one called out to her. Leona kept writing in her notebook. The pen tracking trim load versus elevator lag from the last run. The numbers were clean. Her script was small, even, and precise. At midday, the tarmac swelled with heat. The newer jets gleamed under open sun, their composite skins catching glints of blue and silver. The F-35 crews drilled in pairs, their voices echoing through portable speakers and synced tablets. Leona remained at the edge, kneeling beside the wheel bay with a cloth in one hand. She wiped the leading edge of the intake slowly, feeling for grit, listening for vibration. By late afternoon, she had finished updating the terrain model on paper. The new notes were marked at the margin in blue watch for late downdraft. Adjust early, trim light. That evening, she returned to the simulator. The tech from the night before was gone. The bay lights were dimmed to standby. She powered up the old pod again and entered the parameters manually. Crosswind increased, visibility reduced. Engine spool delay lengthened by 2 seconds. She flew it 3 times. Her hands never shook. Her corrections were always soft, never large enough to trigger the warning prompts. She exited the sim just before the facility locked down for the night and walked back through the darkened compound. Her green jacket zipped halfway, sleeves rolled. No one crossed her path. Back at her room, she taped the updated canyon map beside the others. There were 12 now, each slightly different, each drawn by hand. No digital models, no overlays, only lines traced from recall, from repetition, from the way her body memorized air. She sat for a moment with the flight log in her lap and added a note. Trim match improves below 100 feet. Recheck shoulder flare. Priority is feel, not line. She didn't turn on the light. At the far edge of the base, the wind rose again. A loose cable knocked against a crate. A motion sensor near the stairwell clicked on, then off. The base was at rest, but the sky never was. Leona returned to the airframe. The flight line was nearly empty. Most aircraft were in hangars or wrapped. The F-A-18C sat where it always had, exposed, silent, waiting. She walked the perimeter slowly, hand along the surface as she moved. She touched the rivets without pressure. She listened to the stillness, to the silence of readiness. Her boots made no sound as she circled. At the nose, she paused and looked at the trim dial one last time. Then she exhaled and walked back into the dark. The storm built fast, crawling in low from the ocean shelf and climbing over the ridge without warning. No one had predicted the density shift. The radar model updated mid-cycle, dropping visibility projections by 30%. Barometric pressure dipped fast enough to trigger 2 rebriefs. Still, the command staff moved forward with the test flight. They called it a corridor validation run, just a live systems test in unstable air. The lead aircraft would be one of the F-35s, flown by Ethan, stabilizers on full auto, Flight envelope support engaged, redundant path correction standing by. Leona was not in the ready room when the flight was assigned. Her name came through the comm board at the last-minute fallback. Single sortie. No one handed her an update. No one walked her through the protocol stack. She signed for the mission sheet without speaking and walked to the A-18 on foot. The apron had cleared quickly. The F-35 crews were already climbing into their cockpits. A few nodded to each other. Ethan moved like he had done this 100 times, his helmet under one arm, visor flipped open, boots clicking on the step rail. His jet sat closest to the tower, polished, armed with a clean telemetry rig. He gave a half smile to someone near the crew chief station, then disappeared into the cockpit. Leona approached her aircraft from the shadowed side. The old panel caught the light unevenly. She ran her hand once along the intake and pulled herself up. She clipped in quickly. Helmet sealed. The cockpit smelled faintly of oil and sun. Her map was already in place, taped to the side of the panel, hand-drawn, with wind arrows and elevation marks stacked against the margin. The trim wheel sat exposed beneath the throttle. She adjusted it forward 3 notches and waited. Tower cleared Ethan for takeoff with a calm, fast cadence. 301, you're green. Push at your discretion. Corridor vector in 3 seconds. He acknowledged smoothly. 301 rolling. His jet moved clean, nose tipping up into a near-perfect climb. His comms stayed open. Pathing online, holding 500 at 8 degrees, tracking East Ridge, confirmed terrain follow active. Control replied. Confirmed. Overlay matches. Maintain current heading. Leona's clearance came a minute later. No ceremony. 845. Confirmed on deck. Launch approved. Maintain backup vector until advised. She didn't respond with flair, just a standard reply. 845 rolling. Her FA-18 lifted in a lower arc. Older engines, but tight. She climbed to altitude and slipped beneath the tail vector of Ethan's jet. The gap held steady. The cloud ceiling was already crawling lower, and wind direction had shifted 30 degrees. She adjusted trim by hand, then tapped her left glove twice against the control housing to feel the drag. Ethan's voice returned on comms, this time tighter. Seeing some overlay delay, terrain follow just dropped, resetting sync, standby. A pause, then a second voice from control. 301, confirm manual override. We're not seeing full channel return. Negative. System just froze. It's bouncing off the ridge echo. Visual confirmation. HUD says I'm clean, but I'm not aligned. The nose is drifting right. Control didn't reply immediately. Another voice broke in. Attempt path correction. Full left bank. System should reacquire. Leona checked her own instruments. No HUD. Just raw altitude and heading. She looked ahead and saw Ethan's silhouette begin to shift off the corridor line. He was banking too early, then hesitating. His stabilizer assist began to overcompensate. The aircraft jittered mid-pattern. Correction failed. I'm getting roll lag, he said. It's trying to fly the hill instead of the pass. Control tried again. Confirm full manual repeat, full override. I'm trying, Ethan said. His voice clipped short. It's not clean. Something's hung up. Ahead, the canyon narrowed. The storm wall had moved in over the ridge, curling hard into the pass. Visibility would drop in seconds. Leona watched the movement of the trees below and the wind lines pulling off the slope. She reached down, adjusted the trim wheel, and turned 2 clicks into counterwind. The aircraft responded with a soft shift. She throttled back slightly and began to drop altitude. Control's voice sounded strained now. 301. Telemetry suggests you're losing sync on terrain vector. Abort pass. Return west of ridge. Ethan snapped back. I can't turn clean. I'm still in glide support. It's not letting me hard brake. Static hit the channel. A low, fragmented sound cut through. Then silence. Leona didn't wait. She pushed the trim wheel forward slowly, then brought the stick down and to the left. Her aircraft responded exactly as it always had. No hesitation. No suggestion. Just physics. She dropped to 400 feet, adjusted by sight, and leveled just above the ridge spine. The canyon mouth opened ahead like a long, narrow scar in the rock. She didn't speak. She didn't ask for clearance. She banked low and entered the pass. Her aircraft tilted once, just enough to catch the light. The sun had vanished behind the storm, but a strip of gray angled off the side of her canopy. Below, the terrain shifted fast. She counted tree lines, marked crosswinds by the way the surface bent near the riverbed, and pulled the trim dial one notch right. In the distance, Ethan's F-35 still twitched mid-pattern. It was flying too high for the terrain, too slow for the angle. The aircraft was no longer sure what it was doing. Leona's eyes never left the ridgeline. Her hands never shook. Inside her cockpit, the hand-drawn map stayed pinned beside her leg, one corner lifted in the turbulence. The last mark she had drawn on the page matched the curve ahead exactly. She adjusted again and vanished beneath the shelf. The canyon tightened around her like a funnel. Steep granite walls rose on either side, their edges blurred by wind-carried mist that hadn't settled yet. The pressure changed subtly with every curve, the airflow pushing and then pulling against the wings like the canyon was breathing in reverse. Leona adjusted trim by feel. The dial clicked softly beneath her glove. One notch left, hold, then right again. Each movement quiet, small, exact. The instruments in her cockpit offered only the basics: airspeed, altitude, attitude indicator, no guidance overlays, no flight path projection. The map by her left leg shifted slightly in the updraft. Her own pen lines sketched out the next series of bends drawn by memory, marked with crosswind ticks and altitude deltas along the margins. The pattern wasn't based on satellite imaging. It was based on what she remembered a downcurrent feeling like at that exact point in the corridor. Ethan's F-35 had fallen back. He was still in the canyon, but higher than she was, and starting to drift off pattern again. The stabilizer system was trying to correct for his earlier lag, but it had lost the baseline. His nose dipped slightly too soon. The onboard system caught it and tried to reverse. The trim assist hesitated. The aircraft jolted against its own correction. Leona stayed low. Her flight line followed the bend of the riverbed 200 feet below, invisible from the sky but traced in her notes and hands. She banked left into the tighter curve, the wingtip gliding just above the shadow line where stone met forest. The sun had vanished completely behind the storm wall. The light in the canyon had turned neutral, flat, and hard to read. There were no references on screen. She flew by rhythm and air. Behind her, Ethan's jet lurched again. The wings twitched as the stabilizers fought for control. The HUD in his cockpit likely still showed clear alignment, but the nose angle was off. The sensors weren't catching the terrain shift fast enough. The aircraft wasn't sure what it was flying through. Leona adjusted trim 2 clicks forward and dipped under the ridgeline. A soft updraft lifted her port side slightly. She let it carry, made no sudden inputs. Ahead, the canyon turned again, hard right, then up. The ceiling dropped by 20 feet. She shifted pressure into the yoke with her fingertips, easing the aircraft around without overbanking. The A-18 moved like it knew the way. It was old, but it listened. The wind turned again. This time it curled down through the gap, hitting the slope sideways. Ethan dropped too early. His nose dipped by 15 degrees. He throttled to compensate. The system tried to override again. The trim assist stalled and reset mid-pattern. Leona flew up beside him. She didn't signal. She didn't transmit. She just took her line 3 degrees inside his and held it. Her aircraft moved in a clean arc, low and smooth, hugging the terrain. For a moment, she passed him, barely above the trees. He saw her, or maybe he just saw the shape of the older jet moving in a pattern his could no longer find. She didn't look back. The last turn came fast, a flat right-hand brake followed by a shallow climb that opened into a corridor exit framed by fractured rock. Leona reduced throttle slightly and rolled into it without pause. The F-18 held clean, no shudder, no stall. She pushed the trim dial once more. 1 click, and cleared the canyon. Her aircraft leveled out into gray sky just above the next ridgeline. Open space stretched ahead. The storm sat behind her now, clawing at the edge of the cliffs like it couldn't quite follow. She let the stick settle. The vibrations smoothed out. Her breath matched the engine note. Behind her, Ethan's F-35 broke through the gap. The aircraft came out higher, nose adjusting mid-exit. The wings rocked slightly before he found level. His canopy mirrored the storm behind him. For a second, both aircraft flew straight. Ethan's voice didn't come over the channel. Neither did Leona's. The only sound was the wind sliding across the fuselage. She brought her throttle back gently and let the aircraft drop to a slower cruising pace. Her right hand rested on the trim wheel, thumb against the edge. Pressure relaxed. The old A-18 flew steady. Its surfaces clicked once under strain, then stilled. The sky ahead was open. She checked altitude, airspeed, trim hold, everything in range. From the corner of her canopy, the silhouette of the F-35 shifted behind her, still following, still catching up. His system had stopped fighting him. He was just flying now. The map on her leg rustled once in the airflow from the vent. The pencil lines were already fading near the edges. She didn't look at them again. The terrain had already moved into her hands. She adjusted the trim one last time and flew on, quiet and straight, into clear air. The debrief room stayed quiet longer than usual. Screens lined the far wall, cycling through telemetry logs and visual captures. Most of the chairs were filled, but no one spoke. The hum of the ventilation system was the only sound for a full minute before someone clicked through to the HUD playback. The F-35's onboard video was sharp, every angle recorded with timestamp overlays and system tags. The flight path jittered across the lower third of the screen. At minute 12, the terrain follow line began to blink. At minute 14, the nose dipped, then lifted, then stalled again. The overlays flickered with conflict altitude correction failed. Trim override paused. Terrain sync offline. The stabilization system had tried 3 separate corrections in under 6 seconds before freezing completely. Someone muttered near the back. System just gave up. No one replied. The playback continued. The aircraft bucked once mid-pattern, angle wrong, throttle unresponsive. Then, without warning, the image steadied. No explanation, no command input, no auto-recovery triggered. Just a moment of sudden clarity in the feed. A silhouette appeared ahead in the fog. Smaller, older, lower. The playback operator leaned forward, thumb pausing the screen. There it was. Leona's F-18 barely lit from the reflection off the canyon wall. Wings even and steady, gliding just ahead of the F-35's nose. The frame froze mid-second, timestamp blinking quietly. The aircraft ahead had no stabilizer assists, no terrain guidance, no automated systems. And yet it was holding the perfect line through one of the most dangerous corridors on record. No one laughed. A junior technician stepped back from the terminal. Another brought up the mission board for reference. Leona's name was not listed, not in rotation, not in support. The slot beside the F-18 was blank. She hadn't been assigned to the flight. She had not been cleared for the corridor run. Still, there she was. Ethan entered a few minutes later. He moved slower than usual, helmet tucked beneath one arm, flight suit unzipped at the collar. His face was tight, eyes scanning the room. He walked to the front without comment. His gaze caught the paused frame on the screen. He stood still. Is that her? The question didn't need to be answered. The operator let the playback continue. The F-18 led the way, never drifting, never stalling. The F-35 followed, unsure but mimicking the arc ahead of it. The moment passed in under 10 seconds. The system never tagged her presence. She wasn't supposed to be in the feed. Ethan stared at the silhouette again. She flew it by hand. Someone near the door said, almost to himself, she wasn't even on the mission board. Leona sat near the back of the room. She had arrived unnoticed, her jacket folded over the seat beside her, logbook open across her lap. She hadn't spoken. She hadn't reacted to the footage. Her pen moved slowly as she annotated one of the pages. Altitude entry, throttle, correction. Wind push from canyon wall at 400.0 feet. One correction noted in the margin trim match held at 100.0. She didn't look up when her name was spoken. Ethan turned halfway toward her. He said nothing for a long time. He didn't approach. He didn't reach out. He just stood there, helmet still in hand, watching the woman who had flown him out of the canyon without a single call for credit. He nodded once, quiet, a gesture not of apology but of understanding. Leona looked up briefly, not at him, just toward the screen, where the image of her aircraft had already been replaced by a system fault code. The debrief ended without summary. No commendations, no evaluations. Everyone left slowly, eyes down, steps quieter than usual. The room emptied in less than 5 minutes. Leona remained at her chair for another 10, finishing her notes with the same careful rhythm she had used for every flight. When the last page was filled, she closed the logbook, set it in her flight bag, and lifted her jacket without a sound. She walked out without turning back. The sun was low over the flight line. The light came in soft through the west fence, casting long shadows across the concrete. Most of the aircraft had been rolled into shelter. Only one jet remained outside. Her A-18. It sat as it always had, distant from the others. No call sign painted on the side, panels dull and worn, trim tabs exposed. Leona approached it slowly. Her hand brushed once along the intake, then trailed beneath the wing. She didn't check anything. Not yet. She just stood beside the aircraft and breathed. A voice behind her broke the silence. She was never on the board. The tech said. He was younger. He had watched the playback 3 times, but she flew the corridor like it was written into her hands. He didn't say it to her, just near her, like saying it aloud made it real. Leona crouched once to inspect the landing gear, then stood. She walked the perimeter of the aircraft 1 full time. Her pace never changed. Her hands stayed light on the metal. She stopped near the cockpit and looked at the trim dial inside. She said nothing. The technician didn't follow her back. He just watched her finish the walk. One slow circuit around a machine no one else wanted to fly. The light faded. The wind picked up again, curling low across the tarmac. Leona adjusted her flight bag over one shoulder, then paused. She reached up, tapped the canopy once with her knuckle, and walked on. The post-flight report arrived just after sunrise. It was brief, mostly system logs and fuel discrepancies. The corridor run was listed as completed. Data reviewed. No anomalies noted in the official summary. There was no mention of Leona. Her name appeared nowhere in the mission notes. The flight roster from the day before remained archived with a blank beside the FA-18 slot. No commendation, no debrief excerpt, no footage released. Still, when the new rotation board went up, her name was there. 3rd row from the top, same typeface as the rest. No call sign, no flag, just Leona and a number, the only one paired with the old FA-18. The box beside it marked primary. Her aircraft sat parked near the edge of the fueling pad. The surface was still damp from the overnight rinse, and the fuel lines draped neatly across the tarmac. A young technician moved slowly around the frame, tightening the panel screws and running a final check on the landing gear. He paused by the nose cone, folded Leona's flight jacket with care, and set it across the center line, without a word. Inside the hangar office, Leona sat at the edge of the workbench with her logbook open and her pen steady. The pages had grown thick over time, each one dense with measured data. No emotion, just trim response notes, air pressure margins, angle corrections, timing, drift, and throttle settings under load. The entry from the corridor run filled 3 full pages. No summary line at the end. Only the last notation exit turn, hold achieved. Wind offset verified at 100.0. Control response? Clean. She closed the log and slid it into her flight bag. Her quarters remained unchanged. No medals hung from the wall. No plaques. The room was spare. The cot still aligned under the vent. A pair of worn boots tucked beside a plastic trunk. But the far wall was full now. Hand-drawn maps covered the metal surface in a loose, careful grid. Everyone had been made in pencil, elevations sketched by feel, terrain memory marked in shorthand. Some were curled at the corners, others overlapped. A new one joined them that morning. She had drawn it from recall the night before. No topo reference, no sensor print, just the canyon as she'd flown it each bend, each shift, the way the wind turned after the second climb, and the way the updraft hit just before the drop. She pinned it to the wall in silence, smoothing the edges with her palm. Then she turned and stepped back into the hall. The corridor outside was quiet. A junior pilot crossed in the opposite direction, his helmet clipped to his vest, data pad tucked under his arm. He noticed Leona adjusting the trim setting on her checklist and slowed as he passed. He didn't say anything. He didn't joke. He just watched her work. Eyes focused on the way her hand paused briefly over each note, as if she were confirming a rhythm. He kept walking. No one asked her about the canyon flight. No one pulled her aside or wrote anything down. But from that day forward, her jet was always prepped before any group sortie. The fuel tanks were never empty. The intake filters were always cleared. The ground crew stopped calling it the old bird. They just called it hers. Leona returned to the flight line that evening. The wind had dropped low, and the clouds pulled east toward the edge of the range. The tarmac held the last heat of the day. She walked the perimeter of the aircraft alone, hand brushing the panel seams. Her gloves stayed tucked in her belt. She didn't need them. She didn't carry a tablet or a checklist. She had run every line of that frame 100 times already. The trim wheel clicked once under her fingers. She adjusted it without looking. The technician nearby didn't speak. He just watched her from the edge of the pad, one hand on a cargo dolly, expression neutral. When she stepped back from the fuselage, he nodded slightly, almost out of habit. Then he went back to his work. Leona climbed into the cockpit just after dusk. The sky had turned soft gray, the hangar lights flicking on behind her in steady order. She didn't power up the system right away. She sat with her hands resting quietly on the throttle and trim control, eyes forward, breathing even. There were no voices on the radio, no alerts, no countdown. She flicked the switch for engine cycle, waited for the hum to stabilize, then eased the throttle forward. The aircraft responded smoothly. No stutter in the left intake. The canopy frame vibrated once as the wind caught the side. She checked pitch trim. Left. Hold. 2 degrees. The taxi lights blinked on ahead of her. She eased the jet forward. At the end of the line, just before the hard turn onto the active strip, she paused. The aircraft settled beneath her like it had always belonged there. The storm was long gone now. The air clear over the corridor. There would be no recording of this flight, no commentary, no witness, and none needed. She adjusted the trim one final time, thumb resting on the dial, elbow light on the armrest. The systems held. The throttle ticked upward. Leona looked once toward the empty sky. Then she flew. She was never the loudest in the room, never the one they photographed or praised. But when the storm came and the system failed, it was her hands they followed. Leona didn't need recognition to prove her worth. Her skill lived in repetition, in memory. In the quiet mastery, no one thought to notice until it became the only thing that worked. This is a story about being underestimated, overlooked, and still ready. It is about knowing who you are, even when no one else does, and flying anyway. If her journey made you pause, think about the quiet strength in your own life, the things you do well without asking for approval. Leave a comment to share your thoughts or moments where you've kept steady under pressure, and follow for more stories like this, where silence is not weakness and readiness speaks for itself.